Mercenaries. Guns, money, missiles, and immersive sims. Published on my website, accordionsprout.com, 20th of November, 2023. Mercenaries' Playground of Destruction afforded me the chance to drive a red convertible through a bunker full of North Korean military personnel and then call in a cruise missile strike while slowly walking away, my cheat code-protected avatar ignoring the bullets and RPG fire ricocheting off of his shoulders. I miss cheat codes. I know I'm performing a gross disservice to readers by offering a pithy, back in my day attitude, but I'm tired of having to shell out $5 for a DLC package that lets me miss 0.01% of bullet fire for the first hour of gameplay when 10 years ago all I had to do was move the D-pad up, down, left, and right a few times to become God. I'll grab my walker and see myself out. Mercenaries' Playground of Destruction was released for the PlayStation 2 and Xbox on the 10th of January 2005 and, in no small measure, more or less kidnapped me for several years of play. Long after I had moved on to my PlayStation 3 and began following the career of a small character by the name of Ezio Auditore da Firenze, I still found time to boot the game up on my PlayStation 2 and shoot North Korean soldiers on a painfully low frame rate. In fact, even now, owning a PlayStation 5 with plenty of games to play, I still found an excuse to visit my parents and borrow my old PlayStation 2 just so that I could play the game. And also finally play Silent Hill 2, but that's for another essay. The game follows 3 possible characters, but I always chose Matthias Nilsson, this Swedish edgelord who looks like he has a moderator positions in at least 3 active white supremacist subreddits, and who happens to be voiced by Peter Stormare. Working for a private security firm, Mercenary Operation, that's where we get the title, by the name of X-Ops, our character is dropped into a conflict in the Korean peninsula. There's some attempt at providing a, quote, narrative to the game by showing us newsreels and informing us that the son of a North Korean despot has murdered his father, assumed control of the state, and is now invading South Korea. The game then gives a list of bounties known as the Deck of 52. These men, and a few women, #feminism, are all accomplices to the Ace of Spades, a man by the name of, quick Google search, General Choi Song, who is leading the invasion. Capturing or killing them will guarantee financial reward, especially Song, who is worth $100 million. Matthias is then airdropped into the region in a machine gun-mounted Hummer and told to head to the UN Allies' base of operations. From there, as Cole Porter sang, anything goes. Mercenaries was an open-world game, and because of this was endlessly compared to Grand Theft Auto. And I'm not putting myself above anyone here. It's GTA, but set in the Korean War, was the intellectual impression and elevator pitch that I would offer people who asked me why I liked the game. Not that anyone ever did that. Now that I think of it, nobody ever really asked me what video games I was playing. And honestly, I don't think anyone does to this day either. I'll have to reflect on that. But Mercenaries was also a collect-a-thon, a role-playing game, RPG, a third-person shooter, TPS, and arguably an immersive sim. More on that in a second. Somehow, with all of these great elements and a fun story to boot, Mercenaries' Playground of Destruction didn't impact the video game market as much as it could have, and the series is unlikely to ever make a comeback. I interrupt the recording here to note that I didn't put this in my original essay, but there was a sequel to the game, Mercenaries 2, and it tried to do a bunch of different stuff, graphically, visually, narratively, and it flopped. Critically, financially, so that's probably another reason why the game's unlikely to continue. And then also, a lot of the production companies that are responsible for the original game have either been bought up by larger companies and just very quietly killed, or not so quietly killed. But the point is, we're probably never going to get another Mercenaries game, realistically speaking. And that sucks, but I will get back to the essay. Somehow, with all these great elements and a fun story to boot, I'm repeating myself, but screw it, Mercenaries' Playground of Destruction didn't impact the video game market as much as it could have, and the series is unlikely to ever make a comeback. I struggled with what to write here because this game for me has a lot of nostalgia connected to it, and I don't want to be yet another in a long line of dudes on the internet, more or less killing other people's time by writing another "Them's were the days." Mercenaries had a lot of good ideas and structures that provided interesting gameplay, and while the story was often criticized for being flat, I guess I'm one of the few people who recognize that, well, Yeah, dude, it's supposed to be. Mercenaries was a goofy game about war that was trying to give the player a sandbox where they could freely play with the aesthetic of a military-industrial complex with little to no consequences. In terms of the general narrative, the game is basically an 80s action film, and the dialogue of the protagonist sounds like they were rejected lines from Commando. Trying to approach Mercenaries from a, quote, serious perspective is just going to end in disappointment. Excuse me, my original sentence was, is just going to disappoint, but what have you. Instead, I argue that if the player approaches the game as a free-for-all immersive sim, they'll find very quickly why this game is as fun as it is. So, what is an immersive sim? Immersive sims are, simply put, games that allow the player multiple options in how to solve problems, complete missions, and overcome obstacles. Here's an example straight from the game. Within the world, there are 4 factions fighting the North Koreans, each for their own motivations that are often, if we're being honest, selfish. These are the UN allies, which is basically the United States Army, the South Korean Army, the Russian Mafia, and the People's Army of China. Each of these factions has their own agenda, and while the first missions from each of these factions seem genuinely concerned about defeating the North Koreans, the very next mission is going to be at the other's expense. The second mission the Chinese army offers Matthias is titled, No One Will Ever Know, and the mission involves stealthily assassinating 3 Russian mafia officers who the Chinese want dead. The player is given a crate outside of their headquarters which contains a sniper rifle. It's here, though, that the gameplay of Mercenaries comes full circle. You don't have to take the sniper rifle. You don't even have to be stealthy. The goal that is given to the player is to kill these 3 officers, which means the player is given a wide berth to decide how they want to proceed. For example, they could take the sniper rifle, find a secluded spot, and kill the officers. But if the player doesn't care about playing it stealthily, then they could simply grab one of the nearby Chinese army vehicles, drive to the mission location, and open fire on the Russians in plain sight. This will ultimately hurt the favor the player may have established with that group, but I'll have to save that for another essay. And here I interrupt to note that I have written that essay, and I do plan on recording that and posting it on YouTube sometime in the future, so stay tuned for that. Or head over to my website, accordionsprout.com, and read it for yourself. Back to the essay. Likewise, depending on the weaponry the player has acquired, they could kill these officers with a machine gun, a sawed-off shotgun, or even an RPG. Heck, the player doesn't even have to use guns. They could literally run the officer over with a car, or a truck, or a tank. They might even be able to locate a helicopter and machine gun fire the officer to death from above. I mentioned at the beginning of this essay that I often use cheat codes when playing Mercenaries. This affords the player even more options. These cheats can provide the player with millions of dollars, which in turn can be spent on airstrikes and/or artillery fire. As such, if the player decides they want to avoid using handheld weapons or vehicles, they could always purchase a missile strike, which definitely blows up the Russian officers, leaving them nothing more than piles of meat amongst the rubble. Or, finally, if none of these options are desired, there's always the choice to simply beat an NPC to death. Choices like this are why I would argue that Mercenaries was as much an immersive sim as it was an adventure/shooter game. Rather than limit a player to follow a specific path, Mercenaries provided their character a playground of choices and toys to complete their destructive objective. Oh wow, I just got the subtitle. That's funny. Kinda. Not really. Moving on. Mercenaries gameplay allows this liberty of exploration and action in virtually every level of its structure. While there are 1 or 2 missions the player will encounter that have limitations, there's one mission where you have to ferry around a reporter and not shoot anybody, which is a challenge, not to mention, well, boring. From the moment the player is literally dropped into the DMZ, they are allowed to play the game in any way they want. This applies for the in-game missions, finding the deck of 52, or collecting the various, quote, secret documents or precious antiques that are scattered throughout the region. Just about anything the player can imagine is possible. But it is important to realize that Mercenaries has problems. There are structural issues. with the narrative. The frame rate for the game on the original PlayStation 2 is painful on the eyes. There's software errors that can create annoying glitches, and honestly, driving is kind of a nightmare, especially in tanks. How do you make driving a tank not fun? It's a tank! These are small issues that a remaster or emulation can fix, or at least adjust. But these problems to me are never enough to take away from the freedom of the gameplay. It's nowhere near the expanse of depth of a game like Skyrim, which can allow players to skip the entire main storyline and just collect books for a personal library. But Mercenaries' open world created an experience unlike any of the games I played or have played since. It was a true playground that allowed me imaginative approaches to overcoming obstacles. And I'll be honest, usually those approaches were blowing things up. I blew up a lot of stuff. I blew up airports. I blew up monuments. I blew up North Korean military barracks. I blew up chemical plants. I blew up trucks, tanks, and missile silos. If it could be blown up, I blew it up. Blowing stuff up was fun. At the time, a game like Grand Theft Auto offered up a sandbox for players to explore the world, and the internet abounds with videos and articles of people getting machine guns and fighting police, tanks, and helicopters. This sort of gameplay was, I will totally admit, really fun. But where Grand Theft Auto drew the lines of their sandboxes was their missions where players had to perform a set of tasks and proceed along a specific route. Mercenaries was distinct because it didn't mandate their player in that fashion. And in hindsight, Grand Theft Auto's option for cartoony violence was, and is, a tad abstract against its setting. Firing missile launchers at prostitutes in a remade version of Miami or New York, while ridiculous and sometimes humorous, was absurd in the most philosophic sense. If players could have dropped artillery fire on police in Liberty City, they almost certainly would have. But at that point, the game would have veered off into Fortnite-level buffoonery. And I interrupt here to note, I'm not attacking Fortnite. I'm just trying to point out that GTA is always set in a realistic urban setting. Anyway, Matthias was dropped into a combat zone and told to find 52 men and women. How he did that was left up to the imagination. And maybe a cruise missile or two. Joshua Jammer Smith, 20th of November, 2023. Howdy, I'm Jammer. So, first off, thank you for listening. Whoever you are, wherever you are, I tremendously appreciate it. I say that in all of my videos because I do mean it, but especially with some of these longer form videos or just the longer essays that aren't the under 500 words, I understand especially just listening to some schmuck talking to a microphone with like almost nothing on the screen is a challenge. That's why I usually tell people treat this like a podcast more than a YouTube video. But still, if you're still here and you're still listening, I appreciate it. And hey, even if you're already gone and you only listen to 30 seconds, hey, thank you for giving me 30 seconds of your time. I really do appreciate it. Likewise, if you're enjoying these videos, if you're enjoying the essays on Accordion Sprout, if you're enjoying my visual art, if you just like what you're seeing and hearing, I do have a Patreon. It's in the description section below. It's just patreon.com/jammerdraws, and there's only one tier. It's $1. Like, that's it. $1 a month, and you can also do a one-time donation if you want. I don't care. I treat this like a straight musician. If you like what I'm throwing down, throw me $1. Or don't. It's your money. It's your life. It's your choice. Now, oh, yeah, and the YouTube usual stuff, like, share, and subscribe, all that claptrap. Now, I'm not going to try to spend too much time since this is a longer form essay, so most of what I said has already been addressed. But I do want to point out one thing. This essay is kind of old by my standards. I mean, 2023 really was not that long ago. It's literally just 2 years ago. But this was one of the early essays on my website, Accordion Sprout, when I was just kind of playing around and just trying to figure out what it was I wanted to do with these essays. I knew I wanted to write about video games in some way, but I didn't want to just do boring reviews where it's like, this game sucked, 2 out of 10, or this game is awesome, 11 out of 10, because that kind of content, that kind of writing process just does nothing for me intellectually and emotionally, and there's already so many people doing that. So approaching a game like Mercenaries that I killed arguably well over 100 hours playing, at least, I knew I needed to say something. And so approaching it from the attitude of this game was an immersive sim, it was an open world game at a time when open world games were really beginning to sort of come into their own. Again, I hate to keep bringing this up, but GTA is a really good example. And it's also important to point out, we're talking Grand Theft Auto 3, not the original 2 Grand Theft Auto games. Those are entirely different animals than what GTA 3 was. But I bring it up in this essay to really point out that a lot of times with Grand Theft Auto, and I'm saying this as somebody who has played it, sometimes the violence can become so cartoony. And when players are left to their most basic impulse, which, buddy, I was there. I am not putting myself above anyone. Sometimes it's really fun using a cheat code to give yourself a missile launcher and just start firing at cops. Like, it's a ridiculous moment in a game. But it's ridiculous because it seems so distinct from what would be, quote-unquote, normal in this situation. Whereas in Mercenaries, I'm probably mispronouncing his name. I say Matthias, but please recognize the name is Swedish, and I'm from East Texas, so I guarantee you I'm messing up his names. But Matthias runs up to a car, grabs a Korean civilian out of their car, throws him out, and then steals the car to then drive into a North Korean military base. It's ridiculous, and it's over the top. But the setting somehow manages to create a kind of realism. It's not necessarily like true-to-life realism, but it still presents as a kind of realistic setting so that even the most ludicrous amount of violence that takes place in this game still feels like an attempt to create a real world and afford the player a tremendous amount of agency. Now, at this point in my life, I'm trying to find fewer games that are solely about guns in terms of their interface, not because there's anything wrong with guns in video games, for God's sakes. How many essays have I written about Doom, and how many more essays will I continue to write about Doom because Doom owns? But looking backwards, so many of the games I've played have revolved around firearms, and Mercenaries especially was true to the case. I loved the cheat codes and figuring out all the different sorts of weapons that I could get. I loved firing cruise missiles. I loved hijacking helicopters. This game was awesome. And there's a reason I spent so much time with it, because it afforded me a tremendous amount of liberty. And even though I did play one playthrough from beginning to end, and admittedly, with cheat codes, I am not a hero here, I can honestly say most of my gameplay, for the most part, was pulling up a red convertible, getting in an airdropped M16, and then after that, just driving around and just blowing up North Korean bases, because it was fun. It gave me a tremendous sense of agency and opportunity. And it's a shame that the game is not as relevant as it was at the time, although even then, if you look at reviews from the period, most people just compare it to Grand Theft Auto. They're like, oh, it's a Grand Theft Auto clone, but in the North Korean War. No! No. This game, I would argue, is trying to do something unique and interesting. And it's worth a play. It really is. And that's why I wrote an essay about it in 2023, and that's also why I wrote another essay about it in 2025. So if you've never played it before, please go check out the essay I wrote about it. Check out its entry on Moby Games so you can see some reviews or some screenshots for it. There's tons of playthroughs of it on YouTube. And I mean, hey, there's nothing wrong with trying to go out, find a PS2, find a copy of the game, and playing it. I can honestly say it's worth your time. And with that, I will go ahead and end it here. I just wanted to say again, thank you so much for listening. I tremendously appreciate it. And hey, go play some video games.